So, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. My name is Emma Acton, and I work for Showpad, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. And that's entitled, Why a Sales Enablement Strategy is Crucial to a Successful Sales Kickoff. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to attend, and we hope you find today's webinar really useful. So before I introduce today's speaker, a few housekeeping elements for you. You are listening to this webinar via the BrightTalk platform. A recording of the webinar will be made, and it will be available on the BrightTalk website so that you can share it with colleagues who may not have been able to join today. All attendees will be in a listen-only mode, and if you would like to submit a question during today's broadcast, you can use the questions panel in your BrightTalk screen. We'll be able to see those as presenters, and we will answer those at the end of the presentations. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Firstly, we have Thierry van Herwijnen, who is the Global Director of Sales Enablement at Wipro, and who also runs an initiative called the Sales Enablement Lab, which produces some really great sales enablement thought leadership podcasts and content. And he regularly has guest speakers from the likes of Serious Decisions and CSO Insight. Our second speaker today will be Carl Parrish, and Carl is the VP of Sales for North America at Showpad. And our final speaker will be Emma Dunstone, and Emma is the VP of Global Marketing, also here at Showpad. So I'd like to hand over to Thierry to start today's presentations.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you very much for the introduction. Really looking forward to this. Let's start with a bit of introduction, and a question I get very often asked is, what is actually sales enablement, and where does it come from? For those who are not familiar with sales enablement was a new term and a new role. It kind of started popping up around the 2008-2009 timeframe. The initiative was led by Scott Santucci, who was at that moment working for Forrester, and he hosted a sales executive roundtable. And one of the elements which came up there time after time in the conversation is, how do we make our sales teams the most effective and the most efficient? And that was really a recurring theme during that executive roundtable. What Scott decided to do was to basically brand that as sales enablement and use it as a foundation for his first report, which he wrote, which was called The Hidden Cost of Sales Support, which was kind of groundbreaking because at that moment, nobody was thinking about really calculating the ROI of sales enablement. It kind of happened. It happened in the background. And the big challenge large organizations have is that most of that cost, even today, is still hidden. And I can tell you, I was working for a major enterprise at that moment, and that definitely was the case for us. Interesting enough, the role is still evolving, even after being there now for a good number of years. As Emma said, I run a podcast called the Sales Enablement Lab, and one of the key questions I always ask at the beginning is, give me your definition of sales enablement. And what I have learned over the last few years is that if you ask 100 people, you get at least 120 different definitions and opinions. Everyone has an opinion on this. But the good news is that actually the role is getting more and more mature. If you do a search on LinkedIn and you search for sales enablement, there are literally now hundreds and hundreds of roles out there for sales enablement specialists. Most of the large high-tech companies have now invested in both a sales enablement strategy and a sales enablement role. And even here in Europe, we now see, for example, the investments heavily growing and leaders being asked to build sales enablement teams. So that's all good. It's all getting very, very mature, and that's what we would like to see. The challenge with sales enablement is, as I said at the beginning, is everyone is doing sales enablement anyway. Everyone is doing sales training. A lot of content is being created. But without a sales enablement strategy, what really is the challenge is that it's all hidden. You don't know what the ROI is, and very, very often the materials are developed in different places in the world. So it's very common, for example, to have content being created on the central corporate office, but then in the region it is redone, a lot of additional materials being created, and then sometimes even on a country level. So as you can imagine, there is a lot of investment and a lot of redo of work, which is unnecessary, basically. Sales enablement is also seen very much as a cost center. It's seen as a way to reduce cost. But if you actually do sales enablement right, it can actually form a very solid foundation to accelerate your growth. Because if you really know what content helps you to get and win deals, you can create more of that content and actually unlock more potential opportunities. So if done right, it can really help you to accelerate your growth. So let's look a little bit at some of the definitions. As I said, Forrester was one of the companies who was at first leading this. This is the original definition Scott Santucci published in his Forrester report in 2009. I'm not going to read out to you because you can all see it here on the screen, but I do want to highlight some of the words there which are bold. So this was probably the first time that sales enablement was seen as a strategic ongoing process. Till then, people were doing sales enablement and what we call, there were random acts of sales enablement. So they were not really connected together as a process. They happened all over the place and nobody was connecting them together. So one of the fundamental key ideas of a sales enablement strategy is to really look at it holistically and create an ongoing process around it. It's also important to do it consistently and systematically. So again, it needs to be a strategic approach. And the Forrester definition is really focused on creating what they call valuable conversations. And if you think about a picture with, on the left-hand side, your current scenario, and maybe all the service lines you have in the company, maybe all the different product lines you have in the company, and on the other side, the customer, which is often very chaotic as well and highly complex, the rubber really hits the road in the middle. That's where the conversation happens, and that's where account teams really need to understand the customer business problems and try to fit the right solution on that problem, which is a highly complex process. What Forrester and the Forrester definition is really focused on is how do we optimize that special moment and how do we make sure we maximize the opportunity both for the customer and for the company. Another example of a definition, which is a more recent one, this came after a lot of research in 2005 by CSO Insight. People familiar in this field probably recognize the name of Tamara Schenk, who was the research director for CSO Insight. And her definition is actually similar to Forrester's definition, but is more focused also in bringing in the picture of the frontline sales manager. I would say that's a shift which happened over the last few years, where more and more we realized that it's really important to enable those frontline sales managers as well. Now, a lot of the focus was always on the salespeople. That's where the majority of the investment went in. But it is extremely important that we all also enable and equip the frontline sales managers to actually have those conversations. So we need to think about, as it says here, training and coaching services, not just for the salespeople, but especially also for the frontline sales managers. If you compare both definitions, and there are a lot of more definitions out there on the internet if you do a Google search, and they all come together to some same fundamental principles, right? It's a strategic approach. It needs to be an ongoing process, and it's really thinking about how do we systematically enable our salespeople and how do we make sure that we get the maximum back from our investment there, basically. So why is this relevant to the SKO or the sales kickoff? Well, the reason this is relevant is that sales enablement, at a minimum, should be a major contributor to the SKO strategy. And one of the things we will focus on in a few minutes is that is not automatically always the case. And you're really there to represent the voice of the customer. And it's probably also one of your biggest opportunities you have every year, because typically what you do is you fly in all your salespeople into one major location and you get everyone there and you all listen to the latest and greatest updates. So that's a really good opportunity to have your people, to have your customers all in the room and all at the same time. It's probably the only time every year you have to speak with that audience all at once. So sales enablement is one of the key enablers of the sales kickoff. So it's really important that we look through this as a strategy. This should not be a pinpoint program. It should not be a single event. It's really important that we start looking holistically around how do we create a SKO strategy. And it's key that we start as early. From my former days, the company I worked for, our sales kickoff happened in August, and we already started planning in February, for example. A lot of large enterprises start preparing months in advance before this. So if you don't know who is leading the sales kickoff, my recommendation would be figure it out as quickly as possible and start engaging with that team, because you're not always invited by default. Not a lot of companies think about bringing sales enablement early into the table to discuss the SKO strategy. And the earlier in the loop, the more ability you have to influence. A lot of large enterprises don't still have an SKO. They don't have a kickoff. So I think this is a major opportunity for you, and maybe you should think about starting your own, for example. What's also important is to set clear objectives. One of the mistakes I've always seen with kickoff sessions is that people try to achieve too much. People try to both educate, reward and recognize, align, and buy in, and that's just too much to accomplish in a single event. So it's also really important that you align your strategy with the overall strategy of the SKO. Because one of the other things what I have seen is that, for example, the sales enablement team is focused on alignment and buy-in, whereas the other organizations are focused maybe on reward and recognize, and they always go together. And it might be overwhelming to the sales teams. So one of my recommendations is really make sure you engage early, you understand who's leading the event, and make sure that you're all aligned on the objectives of the event. As I said earlier, don't make it a single event. SKO should be a year-long strategy, and one of the ways I've seen this work very, very well is that you really grab that opportunity when all the salespeople are together, that you follow up, for example, with virtual sessions. You follow up with maybe regional sessions, and you follow up with maybe webinars. And in that case, you also take off some of the pressure of trying to achieve all those objectives at the same time. Because then indeed what you might do is focus on reward and recognition during the physical event. But in the webinars after that, you really focus on education, for example. So that's another way of looking at achieving all those different opportunities. Also, the sales kickoff should be part of a knowledge management strategy. So a lot of the content which you create for the sales kickoff is great material which you can leverage at later stages as well. So one of the things I always say is be careful with sales kickoff branding. It's great to have that fancy kickoff logo there and all the branding for the event and develop a special brand for it. But think about how much time and money you need to spend to remove it at a later stage. So maybe while you're creating it, already make two sets. Make one set you leverage during the event, and make one set you can leverage during the period after. A lot of companies decide to create microsites for the sales kickoff, and typically they're hosted on different systems. Those systems close maybe after 6 months, and I have seen really, really good content being lost because people simply didn't have access anymore to the platform. So I'm a big believer of making it all part of the same platform. Maybe create a special section there. If you're leveraging something like Showpad, you can create a great channel for that. But really make sure that you all put it together in one platform so people always know where to go. You can also find, for example, automatically updates. Also think about the cost pressure on SKOs. One of the things I have seen is that very, very quickly, especially when we get to the end of Q4, people realize maybe that creating a physical event for next fiscal year might be too expensive. And people are asked to shift on a moment's notice to a virtual model. So also be ready with that. And think about how can I create that content, which is not only being used in a physical model, but can also be used in a virtual model. If you're meeting face-to-face, I highly recommend you bring your key stakeholders together. It's, as I said, it's probably your single opportunity every year to bring all the great people into one physical location. So this is the moment for you to learn what your salespeople need for next year, and maybe create a advisory board, for example, have a special breakout and start building your relationships with that advisory board, which you can then leverage during the whole year after. And for me to kind of wrap up, think about the content. Don't just start producing content. Always ask first what the sales teams really need. There are pretty cheap tools available, like SurveyMonkey, for example, where you can very quickly run your own survey and really understand what your sales teams need. And we just talked about that sales enablement advisory board. When you have that team together, the perfect question to ask is, what are you expecting for next year? What content really works for you? And also be consistent. One of the things I always try to reinforce with my team is try to use consistent branding, and also try to be predictable. If you're creating product guides for product A, salespeople also expect that you create a product guide for product B. If you create sales playbooks, try to do that across your product line, for example. So try to be predictable and try to be consistent, also with your branding, but also with your templates, so people know where to go for what piece of content. Keep it simple. Try to break it up in what we call micro moments of sales enablement. So people don't want to watch anymore like 20 or 30 minutes long videos. Try to chunk them up in maybe 5, maybe 8 minutes, and try to make them light, and try to leverage a platform which allows you to create tagging, so people very quickly can find the content which is relevant to them. Try to use one single tool, and I think that's one of the big benefits Showpad gives you, is try to create one environment where you can store all your content. Salespeople hate to go to multiple places to find content. Try to create a central repository or central knowledge management system where people go in and can find all your content. And then the last 2 points, measure. It's really important you understand what content did help you to win what specific deal, because that's the content you want to create more of in the coming months. So that measurement and asking for that constant feedback will really help you to constantly improve the content you create. And then last but not least, create a certification process. There are now great tools out there like Commercial Tribe and QStream, which can really help you to reinforce the message with your sales team. So if you have 3 or 4 key messages, these tools will allow you to take them through a certification process and really understand who of my sales reps are capable of representing the company and are able to deliver that consistent message around my product and services and strategies. So just some quick tips from myself, and what I would like to do now is hand you over to Carl to take you further along on this journey.
Thanks, Thierry. Nice to be talking to everybody today. Just like Thierry finished saying, most companies consider Sales Kickoff cornerstone internal meeting opportunity for sales, and that it sets the tone for the entire year. This is where the company, usually at great expense, I know this because our Sales Kickoff is next week and we're right in the middle of paying for everything now. This is where it gets the team energized and communicates the sales and marketing strategies for the upcoming year. The reason we wanted to do this webcast is that a ton of our prospects and customers come to us around the beginning of the year or right before their SKO, trying to find ways to maximize the impact of their investment and to make sure that sales and marketing strategies align with company objectives. The problem that they have in doing this is that the majority of them lack a higher level, ongoing strategy and working model, making Sales Kickoff planning rough at best. We try to console them, telling them they're not alone, but I'm not sure that helps them sleep better at night. For some data here on this, you can see CSO Insight found that only 1/4 of companies have a formal program and that they collaborate in a chaotic environment pretty much all the time. When you're flying by the seat of your pants with respect to collaboration around something as important as Sales Kickoff, you run a huge risk of making it a complete shambles. Worst case scenario, you have messaging in there that just isn't aligned with what you want to deliver at Sales Kickoff, putting the value of the whole expensive kickoff at risk. The funny thing is that expectations around a good Sales Kickoff are usually pretty low, so nobody notices. This is where a well-executed Sales Kickoff makes you look superhuman, like you just invented time travel by bending the space-time continuum. Our customers tell us that they look at Sales Kickoff as the culmination of everything they do to enable sales. Even though sales enablement is not a point-in-time exercise, it's a marathon and not a sprint. As Thierry just said earlier, like Scott Santucci from Forrester's definition, it's a strategic and ongoing process. We look at SKO as the time to evolve and refresh that strategy, the message, the content, and the way that we sell. This is absolutely required. From my perspective, I know that I personally have never been in a sales organization that expects less out of sales than the year before. And the way that sales achieves that higher expectation is not by doing it the exact same way they did it last year. They must evolve and improve. So Emma and I are going to talk today about 8 pillars of sales enablement as they pertain to SKO, along with some examples of how we and our customers ensure a successful kickoff that lays the foundation for that year-long strategy. There are a couple questions you want to ask yourself before you start to make the biggest impact. Which areas do we focus on? Do all of these pertain directly to our sales kickoff? How do we make this come to life? How are we going to measure this? Remember, you can't improve what you don't measure. And again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Are we treating it as such? So step 1 is getting the right core team together, along with the departments that impact sales. And even if they aren't part of the core team, don't forget customers, partners, and influencers. They can be extremely helpful in doing this. Some examples of some of the roles are executives that create the overall strategy and drive strategic initiatives, product and R&D. They can share successes and talk about the roadmap. And then the training team creates education, coaching, and mentoring plans for the sessions. Marketing creates the high-level messaging and works with sales on content. And then sales and sales ops, they drive initiatives, themes, and align groups around the event. Each team will have their own deliverables and dependencies on one another, and if the group is not carrying their weight, it can cause a domino effect that puts the entire sales kickoff at risk. Just as a quick side note here, the best way to collaborate around sales kickoff is to remember that sales kickoff is for sales people. Keep it relevant to how any and all of this helps them make their number for the year. That's what they care about. Nothing kills sales morale more than a sales kickoff that has nothing to do with sales. Okay, so the team is in place. Now it's time to align the strategies. You've got your 2016 initiatives, I hope. Take them and wrap a sales kickoff theme around them and start to get buy-in by socializing this well in advance. And then treat the main stage delivery of these initiatives as if you were presenting to customers or to the media. A little showmanship can go a long way here. Then you roll out your strategies with promotion everywhere your sellers go. Keep it top of mind for them. Have exciting announcements, and most importantly, have a deployment strategy for them after sales kickoff to follow up and reinforce. All right, you've got the strategy. Now let's make it stick with training and coaching. These are so important. The first one, leverage small interactive groups. Learning does not happen effectively in large groups, but rather small groups where everyone can actually be interactive with one another. Reinforce everything digitally for self-paced mobile learning opportunities. This is absolutely crucial because it gives the sales audience a chance to get back to the material any time they want or need to. 90% of training is forgotten within a week, and if your sales kickoff is a week long, well, you know where I'm going with this. It's a huge waste of time and money if you don't reinforce it. And then assigning pre-work ahead of time gets your salespeople engaged even before they arrive. And so does a team or individual contest like a game show or something. Salespeople love to compete, so give them what they want. And then, and this is something about salespeople specifically, and I am one, so I can say this, make sure to incentivize them with prizes like extra PTO, VIP privileges, experiences, and of course, money. Salespeople are coin operated after all. But my personal favorites are incentives that you can give them right there at the sales kickoff. It's immediate and public recognition, and that's two things that salespeople absolutely love. Big sales events require a good build-up, but be careful here of information overload or desensitizing your audience with too many emails. My suggestion is to selectively create notifications, informational pieces, and alerts that fit within your larger communication strategy. Or have your top salespeople share sales kickoff details along with why they're excited about the event. And then you can also leverage the element of surprise with exciting alerts and announcements from executives. But a caution here, make these actually exciting, not just news. Again, you run the risk of desensitizing the audience. And this last part is so important. From a feedback perspective, leverage every opportunity you can to understand sales feedback on the content and sessions, but also use SKO as an opportunity to document all of their questions, objections they receive, and customer stories so you can leverage that later for content creation. Make sure that they know you care about their feedback and have an easy way to gather it. So I said we'd cover 8. I covered 4 pillars of sales enablement and sales kickoff that I drive as a sales leader, but I'm sort of sick of hearing my own voice, and you probably are too. So I'm going to ask Emma to talk about the last 4 because they relate a little bit more to marketing. But again, remember, the reality is that all of these are not strictly sales related or marketing related. They're interdependent and require good collaboration to be successful. I'll look forward to taking some questions at the end, but for now, I'll turn it to Emma.
Thanks, Kyle. So, hi everyone. I'm really excited to talk with you today. I'm your last presenter, so if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat panel and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Now, as a marketing leader, I've worked with several different sales teams on kickoffs, and at ShowPad, our own is right around the corner right now. Of course, the real secret to SKO success is being able to hide the alcohol at a certain point in the night and, of course, double down on brewing that coffee in the morning. But in reality, as a marketer, I get really excited about all the new ideas and all the new content that we as a team work tirelessly on as we prepare in the run-up to an SKO. But one of the things that we wanted to hear and that our sales customers have taught us is that dropping a big bunch of content on sales at SKO is a huge reason that they can feel overwhelmed. Without structure and the context of how to use it, content adoption is going to fall flat, and the people that generated that content are going to feel disillusioned. So it's really important that for each piece of content that we create, that we know how this fits in our overall content strategy. And is it really in alignment with what we're doing the rest of the year as well, rather than just being specially developed as a different theme around sales kickoff that hasn't been heard of before and isn't continued after? So when we develop our content in terms of a sales kickoff, there's 4 major questions that we ask ourselves. The first is the audience. Who is this content intended for? Is it aligned to the people who sales really talk with? The types of companies that they deal with, such as including their industry alignment, or their roles in any buying decision. Make sure we know who we're developing the content for. And then the stage, how does this fit within the marketing funnel and the sales cycle, or more importantly, our customers' buying cycle? If there's a certain point in a stage where we're trying to move people forward, how can we align our content with that? And the goal, and maybe this should even be the first one, right? What is the goal of this content and the outcome that we're trying to achieve? There's so many different types of meetings or stages where you're trying to overcome objections, or you're trying to go into closing mode, or perhaps you're just trying to educate your client throughout. It's really important to let sales know what the objective is of each piece of content and when they should be using it. And then fourthly, it's making sure that really understanding how sales are going to need to access that content in the situations where they need it. This is going to help us decide not only the format of the content, but also how we can make it readily available. Do we want to guide our sales teams to the right content based on the type of person they're speaking with, or the situation, and be that face-to-face, online, one-to-one, or one-to-many? Or do we align structure by stage of buy cycle, by our content initiative, by sales of the stage cycle, all of the above? Or perhaps just simply it's customized as flagging hey, you're talking to this company, but you haven't yet walked them through this amazing customer reference in their peer organization. Or perhaps, look, you're at this stage of the buy cycle. Typically, the leading reps in your company are leveraging this particular piece of content right now. Why don't you try this? It's not just about getting the content and getting it in front of sales. It's helping them to use it in context. You can go as far as creating playbooks for this and serve up the content based on the initiative. One of Showpad's interesting client examples is the enterprise who created an interactive infographic map of all their new content and how it relates to their existing content initiatives. They then serve that up to sales, so they really have the context to get excited about the content that marketing is sharing with them and how they're going to use it with their own customers once the SKO is over. Now, you may have all this great content, but one of the things that we're maniacal about here is actually measuring and defining the impact of our investments, not just at SKO, but also all year round. So to know where to invest more resource, you need to know what type of content is accelerating the sales cycle. And with the strategy of measuring overall adoption of content and its effectiveness, you'll want to have a quantitative approach, as well as the usual qualitative feedback that you may get at the water cooler or in sales feedback meetings, so that you can measure usage and effectiveness. A few things that you can measure right off the bat is to understand overall sales team engagement. Who's logged in the most during SKO? What and how much content did they view? And is that dropping off? Use that information to answer the question, how do we keep it vibrant with different groups? If there's a core group that's really adopting, maybe we leverage them to train another group that didn't show as much adoption, for example, during or after their sales kickoff. So consider also how much content was consumed around your SKO's stated strategic imperatives. If you look at a specific category of content, such as a new product launch, what was the impact of the team looking and using this particular type of content? And the same is true for training. What videos did the team view? Did they stop halfway through the video, or did they view the entire piece? And did they really digest that information? When you send out internal alerts and notifications with new content, how many of your team convert and actually go and consume that content? And lastly, are they really leveraging all these new content and playbooks that we put out there? Now, the challenge here is that the only way that you can really get this analytics is by having some sort of digital platform in place. We live in an age where you can measure pretty much everything. You know, my team and I measure everything that we're going on with marketing qualified leads, web traffic, free trial downloads and conversion paths, blog, email, you name it, and we'll measure it and we'll action it if it will make us better. So to measure how sales views, learns from, and then continues to use the content we develop for our sales kickoff, we as a team will obviously leverage Showpad's powerful content management platform and use this to train and guide our sales reps. But whatever platform you use, technology really is the launchpad for everything that we've just talked about. You will want to make sure that you have this platform in place and are easily able to measure the adoption through your sales kickoff and beyond. And that's why it's another of the key and sales enablement pillars. Make sure it has the ability to allow you, as a marketer or sales enablement leader, to easily publish all this content. You're going to be publishing things on day 2, perhaps of your sales kickoff, that you then want taken away at the end of the event. Or maybe it's a welcome in the morning. Make sure it's easy so you can easily publish any form of content, not just the formal stuff. A lot of this is going to be video and communication. Maybe it's a message from your VP of sales in the morning. It says, hey, get out of bed. I know last night was fun, but now we've got the sessions to come. You can push that to your sales reps, wherever they may be. You know, that content also, an important piece is presenting it all. You know, we've all seen that presentation go wrong when you don't have the presentation tools, or, and I'm really bad at this, you're making revisions last minute on a jump stick. So some of us will use the content that we present in our sales kickoff direct from our iPads or our tablets. Others will use their Mac or their Windows laptops. But we're all going to be presenting it from within the one dedicated, fully branded sales kickoff channel on our own platform. So, which enables the audience to follow along on their own devices if they want to. The important thing is not just any technology that you use can easily present to everybody, but that your then reps can then present it to customers with that same content later. And if using it in a similar way, in a similar place, means that they already know how and where to find it. One of the things that I think is really interesting about a sophisticated content management platform is the ability to deploy interactive apps custom to your sales teams and environments. And Kyle talked about, doing a really good sales kickoff, making a really good impression, and how that can make you look superhuman and really be the thing that's remembered. And something like a custom app that really guides your reps through the sales kickoff experience can really provide that wow factor. One of the customers that we have has created a strategic account application on our platform. It shows you the customers that you have. You can select a customer and it will tell you what new sales content related to that customer, and what initiatives are basically it's serving up. If this was industry X, then this type of content fits. For a certain existing customer, this new upgrade for a product might pop up on that app for them. It really helps sales guide those conversations and frame those conversations with their customers. There's a lot of interesting ways to engage sales, and it's a great opportunity for marketing and sales to get creative, which is the fun bit, right? And of course, make sure that everything you do is able to be accessible if your Wi-Fi goes down. We've all heard about the hotel horror stories on Wi-Fi, and the less said about them, the better. So we talked about having the right content. You have a place to put it. You have a place to serve it up. You have everything that you need for your sales kickoff team. You have these great analytics to see how successful your sales kickoff has been. The most critical point of failure is really not having a strong operational plan all year that needs to extend out and keep the momentum from sales kickoff going. As you are finishing up your sales kickoff, make sure to institutionalize all the material, training, tools, and processes that you've provided your sales team. Even in the closing sessions, make sure people are transitioned, letting them know what's changing with their territory, with their lead flows, with their methodologies, anything that would affect the next day's sales conversations. To Kyle's point, make sure that it's relevant to their job, and as they walk out that room, they are more equipped to do their job than they were when they walked in. So consider your key enablement pillars and outline what you need to do before, each, during, and after SKO. Make sure you complete the after and don't move on to the next project. And what we're really talking about here is if you have this operational plan in place, sales kickoffs are a lot easier to plan for, to execute against, and to measure success afterwards, and to be able to justify the cost of the event. And today, Kyle's brought up a lot of the challenges that most companies have with no formal strategy and ad hoc collaboration. In reality, little of this ad hoc work is going to be remembered to be integrated into a sales kickoff. And a lot of organizations fear that having a formal strategy for sales enablement is going to be a lot of work. Well, it is. But if you're going to invest in sales enablement and go to the expense of a kickoff, we believe that you should put effort into aligning the groups, the processes, the tools you're going to put in place. But in reality, you're spending a lot of money on the content and training all this stuff anyway. Even if you just invest in a high-level sales enablement for the year, the return that you're going to see on every dollar is substantial. Just to close, this is one of the charts that we walk a lot of people through. CSO Insight found that companies that invest in sales enablement are far more competitive than those who don't. If we took $200 million companies that were both supposed to grow 5% in 2016, but neither had a program. And say one implemented a program at the end of last year, and one did not. CSO Insight estimates that they're going to make $20 million more than their competitor by the end of this year. And we really believe that investing in this ongoing program for sales enablement will not only just impact your SKO, but impact top-line revenue and bottom-line revenue growth. I hope that was helpful. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Emma Acton, for any questions that have come in.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Emma, and thank you to all of our speakers for a very insightful and practical to ensure that we're all going to have super sales kickoffs and that they can be achieved through continual sales enablement throughout the year. Let's have a look at the questions that have come in. Okay. How do you see the role of sales enablement evolve over the coming years? That's probably one for you, Thierry, as you're living and breathing it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a key question, and we hear that a lot, right? So let me try to give you a analogy here. So if you look in finance, the role from accountant has really evolved into the role of the CFO, basically. And if you ask me personally, I think sales enablement will evolve into a very similar strategic CXO function, probably much quicker than we all expect. So some companies are now starting to create what we call the chief value officer role, who really is empowered to look across all the different functions within the company and try to translate that into customer value. And that's where I see sales enablement evolve over time. Will probably take another 4 to 5 years. You can see the early signs of it already, but I think sales enablement will even become more strategic than it is today and probably end up as a CXO function as a chief value officer.
Super, excellent. That's great stuff. Thank you for that. Let's have a look. Is sales enablement still a US thing, or do you see it in Europe now as well?
Yeah, it is no longer. So actually, I moved from the Bay Area 2 years ago back to Europe, and one of the things I was really surprised about is. And Kyle, you're sitting in the Bay Area, right? So you see all these sales enablement conversations and all these sales enablement roles coming by every day. What I realized is that we're not there yet here in Europe 2 years ago. Now, if you go on LinkedIn and you search for the roles in like Amsterdam, for example, or in Düsseldorf or in Berlin, there are many sales enablement roles there now already. So maybe it's not on the same strategy level yet. What we do see is that, especially in high tech, a lot of these sales enablement initiatives are run either out of the East Coast or the West Coast. But what I do also see is that a lot of the companies were headquartered out of Europe are putting sales enablement leads in Europe as well. So it definitely is very mature now, and people are investing even in Europe in that.
Super. Yeah, I think we're seeing that an awful lot from this side with the inquiries we get, but also talking with the likes of Tamara, who herself is based here in Europe, and the events and other elements that she's speaking at, and the research that she's doing. She's, I know, getting a lot of input from European countries, a lot more than she ever did before. This one's actually for you, Emma. So. Sales enablement, our sales enablement team is part of marketing, but should it report to sales? What is, and maybe yourself, Kyle, where do you guys see that sort of fit where sales enablement should be part of?
You know, that's a great question. Typically it has sat in marketing, and we're definitely seeing a shift to it moving towards sales. I mean, I'm a huge believer of sales and marketing being joined at the hip anyway. So in reality, where it sits shouldn't make a difference from that collaboration standpoint. I do believe that the best sales enablement teams actually don't tell my marketing counterparts necessarily, that should sit in sales with the people that really are at the front line talking to those customers. But marketing needs their product marketing and their marketing leadership really tightly integrated with that, because we are creating the content, we're creating the tools, and that two-way sync is really, really important. But ultimately, the best sales enablement people are the people that enable sales because they've done it themselves before.
Super. Carl, any comments from your side, sitting on that sales side?
I'm sitting here in the same room with Emma, and I'm smiling ear to ear because I couldn't have said it better myself. Our sales enablement team here at Showpad does report into sales, and I like it that way, but the reality is that our sales enablement team has so much crossover with marketing that it's really a dual job. As long as you set it up properly, it almost doesn't matter where they report into, as long as the expectation is that they work cross-functionally with both teams. Like Emma said, we believe in sales and marketing being joined at the hip and being very communicative and having the same goals and alignment. But in organizations where that's not the case, I would recommend reporting into sales, just because the sales team will give better feedback and the sales enablement person will be more effective.
Great, thank you. And Thierry, how do you see it in your side of things in WePro? Oh, do we have Thierry there?
Yes, you do.
Sorry.
I was on mute, sorry. So we report into a special branch around strategic initiatives. So that's a little bit of even a different setup. I'm with Carl and Emma. To be honest, I don't care about it, to be very honest. It's the question which is always being asked. And in large enterprises, it is a very political question, and people are losing actually a lot of cycles on that question. I'm a big believer in, okay, at some stage, make the decision, get started. And if that requires that you need to shift it at some stage, I would be open to that as well. So I think the most important thing is, if you're at the beginning of this, find the right executive sponsor who believes in this as a strategic approach, make it mature, run a set of pilots to prove the value, and then you can slowly find the right spot. I do believe with Carl that probably once it is a very mature organization, the closest you are to sales, the better it is, because the closer you will be aligned, and it will be easier to get access. So, but it might mean that you start in marketing, run a few pilots, prove the value, and then over time you realign it to sales.
Great, super answers, thank you. So that actually brings us to the end of the online questions that have been asked. I will wrap this up with a little bit more information about Showpad. So if you do want to learn more about our customers and the platform, please visit the website and look at the resources page. We've also got the opportunity on the website for you to start a free trial, and then there's get in touch details there. And at the beginning, and this will be shared in the recording, were Thierry's details with his Twitter profile, his website for the Sales Enablement Lab, and his LinkedIn profile, and I'm sure he'd welcome questions or direct contact. So a massive thank you again to our presenters for today, and a huge thank you to you as the audience for joining, and we look forward to welcoming you to future webinars. Thank you very much.